The merciless sun punished the streets without mercy that suffocating afternoon. Ainsley dragged her small bare feet across the hot concrete, feeling each step as an ordeal. Her 12 years of life had all been marked by misery, but the last 3 days had been particularly cruel. She hadn't managed to put anything in her stomach besides a few sips of water from a public fountain. Her dress, once colorful, now displayed an indefinite shade of dust and wear, too big for her frail body. The long black hair, tangled and lusterless, framed a childish face where the brown eyes, large and expressive, seemed enormous in contrast with her cheeks hollowed by hunger. She stumbled slightly as she dodged a hurried man who passed by her, as if she were invisible. If only there were leftovers at the market today, thought Ainsley, remembering the merchant who sometimes took pity and gave her bruised fruits at the end of the day. The streets of the commercial center buzzed with activity. Businessmen and women rushed by in their impeccable suits and high heels, solemnly ignoring the small figure struggling to remain standing. Ainsley knew that indifference well. It was as if there was an invisible veil between her world and theirs, an insurmountable boundary of social classes that made her practically invisible. The girl had learned the harsh lessons of street survival too early, after losing her mother to an illness that could have been treated if they had had money. Her father she had never known. Since then, she had lived off small jobs, occasional handouts, and what she could find in the trash of fine restaurants, where people paid more for a dish than she had ever seen in her entire short existence. "People throw away enough food to feed everyone like me," she whispered to herself, feeling a sharp pang of hunger that made her briefly double over. But today I can't even find that. Sweat ran down Ainsley's forehead as she momentarily leaned against a wall to catch her breath. Her legs were dangerously shaking, and she knew she wouldn't last much longer. Hunger had surpassed the pain phase. Now it was a sensation of profound emptiness, as if her stomach had disappeared, giving way only to a black hole consuming her strength. Her small hands, calloused from collecting cans, instinctively touched the pocket of her dress where she kept a small metal medal, the only memento of her mother. It had no monetary value, but for Ainsley it was a protective talisman, proof that once someone had loved her unconditionally. In the most difficult moments like that one, she would squeeze the medal between her fingers and try to remember her mother's face, increasingly diffuse in her childish memory. "Mom said angels exist," she murmured as her heavy eyes observed the street movement. "Today I would need one to avoid fainting from hunger." A stronger dizziness made the world spin around Ainsley. The intense colors of the street began to blend into a confused blur, and she realized she was about to faint. Her senses, sharpened by years living on the streets, were beginning to fail. Normally, she could identify by smells which establishments were serving meals, which garbage cans might contain still usable leftovers, or even which person seemed more likely to offer a few coins. But now all she felt was the metallic taste in her mouth and a persistent buzzing in her ears. Her vision was beginning to darken at the edges, as if a tunnel was slowly closing around her. Ainsley knew she needed to sit down before she fell. It wouldn't be the first time she fainted in the street, but each time it happened, she risked being taken to a government shelter, places she avoided at all costs after previous traumatic experiences. "Just a little more," she encouraged herself, though her voice was barely a whisper. "I just need to reach that big building." The enormous corporate building stood imposingly at the end of the block, with its mirrored walls reflecting the blue sky. To Ainsley, that construction had always seemed from another world, a symbol of the abyss that separated her existence from the lives of those who worked inside it. Ironically, she knew the place offered a pleasant shade at its entrance, and most importantly, guards who, although they eventually expelled her, generally did so after offering a glass of water, or, on lucky days, a piece of bread from the cafeteria. It was her best bet at that desperate moment. Each step now required a monumental effort. Ainsley focused only on moving one foot after the other, ignoring the looks of disgust she received from well-dressed passers-by. The contrast between her emaciated figure and the people around her couldn't be more striking. While they carried leather briefcases and expensive cell phones, she carried only the weight of daily survival on her fragile shoulders. "If I can make it there," she thought, feeling her legs weaken with each meter traveled. "Maybe today I'll be lucky." The sudden wind brought with it the torturous aroma of freshly prepared food from a nearby restaurant, making Ainsley's stomach contract painfully. Reflexively, she looked toward the source of the smell, seeing through the window people savoring hearty meals, talking and laughing, completely oblivious to her existence. A half-consumed plate was set aside by a customer, and Ainsley felt involuntary tears form in her eyes, imagining the waste that would follow. In her worst moments, she had considered entering such places to take the leftovers from tables, but the few attempts had resulted in humiliation and threats to call the authorities. Society had clear rules about where people like her could or could not be, and fine restaurants definitely fell into the second category. A couple exited the establishment, the woman holding a takeout container. For a brief moment, her eyes met Ainsley's, but quickly turned away as if observing misery for too long might contaminate her. "They can't look at me," Ainsley murmured, a bitter wisdom beyond her years tinging her words. Looking forces feeling, and feeling forces action. The sidewalk seemed to stretch endlessly, like an urban desert that Ainsley needed to cross with her last strength. Hurried people occasionally bumped into her, some muttering irritably, others simply continuing on their way as if they had collided with a post, not with a hungry child. The girl had already learned not to expect apologies. Her social invisibility was almost complete. The sounds of the city, horns, conversations, music escaping from shops, began to distort in her ears, as if she were submerged in water. Ainsley concentrated all her will on fixing her eyes on the entrance of the business building, now just a few meters away. The security guard was there, as always, observing the street with a bored expression. On normal days, she would have waited for the moment when he was distracted to approach. But today there was no energy for strategies, only the raw need to reach a place to sit before her body gave out completely. One step. Just one more step. She repeated to herself like a mantra, her breathing increasingly shallow and rapid. After what seemed like an eternity, Ainsley finally reached the shaded area in front of the imposing glass building. Her legs finally gave way, and she slid down the wall, sitting on the cold marble floor. The temperature contrast with the heat of the street provided minimal momentary relief, but it wasn't enough to combat the extreme dizziness and weakness. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to contain the tears that threatened to escape. Ainsley hated crying in public. It was one of the rules she had established for herself since finding herself alone in the world. Crying showed vulnerability, and vulnerability on the streets was dangerous. But at that moment, her body no longer responded to the commands of her will. A solitary tear ran down her dirty cheek, leaving a clean trail on her brown skin. The security guard finally noticed her presence and frowned, but something in the extremely debilitated appearance of the girl prevented him from expelling her immediately, as would be standard procedure. "I won't cause trouble," Ainsley whispered, though she doubted he could hear. "I just need to rest a little before continuing." From inside the business building, behind the revolving glass doors, the world seemed to function in another dimension. Executives and secretaries moved through the luxurious lobby, absorbed in their corporate concerns. Through increasingly blurred vision, Ainsley observed that parallel universe with a mixture of fascination and resignation. From a very young age, she had understood that there were two distinct worlds operating simultaneously in the same space. The visible one, of those who had everything, and the invisible one, of those who, like her, fought daily for basic survival. The revolving doors separated these worlds as effectively as walls, though they were transparent. Occasionally someone would exit or enter, casting uncomfortable glances in Ainsley's direction, before quickly averting their gaze and continuing on their way. The girl no longer had the strength even to extend her hand in a silent request for help. All she could do was breathe heavily and hope that the darkness threatening to swallow her would recede a little. "If I faint here," she thought with surprising clarity amid the torpor of hunger, "at least someone will notice me." Ainsley's head drooped forward as she struggled to maintain consciousness. The sun began its descent on the horizon, marking the end of another day of struggle for survival. Shadows lengthened across the sidewalk, while the flow of people leaving work increased considerably. For most of them, the day was ending, and the promise of dinner and rest at home awaited them. For Ainsley, twilight meant just another night with an empty stomach and uncertainty about where she would sleep. Her fingers instinctively tightened around the medal in her pocket, as they always did when she felt fear or despair. The cold metal against her warm skin was comforting, a tangible reminder that she hadn't always been so alone. The noise of the city seemed increasingly distant, as if it were moving away from her, or perhaps it was she who was drifting away from the world. Her eyelids felt as heavy as lead, and even the effort to keep them open now seemed beyond her capabilities. Maybe I should just close my eyes for a moment, she murmured to herself, as she felt her consciousness slip away like sand between fingers. Ainsley could no longer resist the weight of exhaustion and devastating hunger. Her small body finally gave in, sliding down the wall until it lay stretched out on the cold sidewalk. The last flickers of consciousness registered people continuing to pass around her, some glancing briefly, others deliberately looking away, but none stopping to help. Her world was swallowed by darkness as she lay there, invisible among the crowd, another victim of the indifference of a society that preferred not to see the suffering at its doorstep. The little beggar fainted from hunger exactly where she had sought refuge, in front of the imposing building that symbolized everything she was denied in this world. The Harrington mansion gleamed under the morning sun, its white walls and perfectly manicured gardens reflecting the opulence of its owners. Savannah stretched languidly on the king-size bed, her fingers sliding over the Egyptian silk sheets as she observed the empty space beside her. Garrison, as usual, had left early for the company. At 30, Savannah maintained the beauty that had made her a model for a brief period before her marriage to the widowed millionaire 20 years her senior. Her shiny black hair framed a face with delicate features, full lips always impeccably painted, and golden eyes that could enchant or calculate depending on the occasion. The young woman rose with feline movements, adjusting the red silk nightgown that dramatically contrasted with her fair skin. She walked to the balcony and contemplated the privileged view of the gardens, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Who would have thought that a mechanic's daughter would come so far? She whispered to herself as she ran her fingers along the marble handrail. And this is just the beginning of what I deserve. Breakfast was already served on the terrace, the table set with fresh fruits, various breads, and a selection of imported cheeses. Savannah served herself a cup of coffee, drinking the bitter liquid while distractedly leafing through the fashion magazine in front of her. Her mind, however, was far away. She was calculating how much longer she would have to endure the marriage to Garrison before her husband's fortune would finally be hers. They had married just 2 years ago, after a whirlwind romance that followed the death of his first wife. Savannah knew exactly what to do to win over a grieving and lonely man: feigned vulnerability, theatrical understanding, and, of course, nights of pleasure that made the old businessman believe he had found love again. Her plan was simple: a few years of marriage, a well-negotiated divorce, and half of the fortune in her hands. However, something was bothering her. In recent weeks, Garrison seemed distant, spending more time at the office and less time at home. Changes in her husband's behavior always left her alert. "Something is wrong," she murmured, placing the cup on the table with enough force to make the dark liquid spill over. "And I need to find out what it is before it affects my plans." After coffee, Savannah headed to the main bathroom for her morning beauty routine. The lengthy ritual was essential to maintain the appearance she had used as currency throughout her life. As she applied imported creams to her face, her mind elaborated possibilities about her husband's recent behavior. Was it a lover, a crisis at the company, or was he finally seeing beyond the facade she had so carefully constructed? The last option was the most concerning. Savannah knew well the type of man she had conquered, successful in business but naive in relationships. Garrison believed she loved him, that her interest went beyond the financial empire he controlled. Maintaining that illusion was constant work, a daily performance that required talent and dedication. Any slip could ruin years of meticulous planning. Savannah faced her reflection in the mirror, the golden eyes reflecting a cold determination she never allowed her husband to see. "He will never know who I really am," she affirmed to her reflection, applying the red lipstick with calculated precision. "Not until it's too late to do anything about it." Dressed in an elegant blue silk outfit, Savannah decided she would spend the morning reviewing the household accounts, a task that Garrison entrusted entirely to her. It was one of many strategies she used to maintain control over the domestic environment. Knowing every expense, every employee, every detail of her husband's life that might eventually prove useful. She headed to the mansion's main office, A spacious room decorated with dark wood furniture and shelves filled with books that Garrison collected but rarely read. The majestic desk dominated the center of the room with a state-of-the-art computer on it. Savannah sat in the leather chair, turning on the computer while organizing the folders with the month's bills. That's when she noticed something unusual. A brown folder of legal documents carelessly left on the desk, something rare for someone as meticulous as her husband. "What do we have here?" she asked aloud, slowly opening the folder like someone unwrapping an unexpected gift. Garrison never leaves important documents in plain sight. The contents of the folder made Savannah's blood freeze. It was a new will signed by Garrison the previous week, without her knowledge. Her golden eyes quickly scanned the pages while her heart raced. According to the document, in the event of the businessman's death, only 30% of his fortune would go to his wife. The rest would be distributed among various charities that supported homeless children. Savannah felt rage growing in her chest, transforming her beautiful face into a mask of fury. In the previous will, which she knew about, she would inherit 70% of everything. The change was radical and completely unexpected. Garrison had never shown such interest in social causes before. What could have prompted this sudden change? The answer didn't matter as much as the implications for her plans. Years dedicated to winning the trust of the old millionaire, to enduring his irritating habits and his tedious business stories, all to end up with crumbs of a fortune that should be entirely hers. How dare he? She hissed through her teeth, slightly crumpling the edge of the document. All this theater to end up receiving less than any corner orphanage? While furiously typing the banking system password into the computer, Savannah tried to control her breathing. She needed to think clearly. The will was signed, but it wasn't yet final. Garrison could change it again at any moment. This meant there was still time to act. She accessed the joint accounts, checking the current values. The fortune was even larger than she had imagined, which made Garrison's betrayal even more unbearable. 30% was a considerable amount for most people, but not for Savannah, who had calculated every second of her marriage based on the expectation of inheriting much more. It wasn't just about the money, but the insult, the breaking of a tacit agreement between them. She offered youth, beauty, and companionship. He was supposed to reciprocate with perpetual financial security. The modification to the will was a violation of this unwritten agreement. "He can't simply change the rules of the game whenever he wants," she muttered, closing the bank accounts and opening a new tab in the browser. "If that's how he wants to play, I can change the rules too." An idea began to form in Savannah's calculating mind, a definitive solution to her problem. If the current will didn't favor her, and if Garrison could alter it at any moment, making her situation even worse, then the only guarantee would be to ensure that the will came into effect before any new change could occur. In other words, Garrison needed to die, and soon. The thought should have shocked her, but Savannah discovered that the idea seemed strangely natural, as if it were just the next logical step in her plans. Her husband's death had always been in her calculations, just not so soon. She had imagined that a man 20 years older would naturally depart before her, leaving her as a wealthy widow. Now she realized she couldn't trust time. She needed to take the reins of the situation. She needed to accelerate the inevitable. Her delicate fingers typed quickly on the keyboard, while her eyes checked if she was really alone in the house. The staff were busy with their usual tasks, far from the office. No one would disturb her. An accident would be too risky, she reflected quietly, her eyes fixed on the computer screen. "I need something discreet, undetectable, something that seems natural." The anonymous browser displayed search results about natural poisons undetectable in autopsies. Savannah read avidly, absorbing information about substances extracted from plants and animals that could cause cardiac arrests without leaving traces in the body. Her background as a pharmacy student, a course she had abandoned upon realizing that beauty would open doors more quickly, now proved surprisingly useful. She understood basic chemistry, drug interactions, dosages. With the right knowledge, she could execute a perfect plan. Garrison was 50 years old, an age when heart attacks wouldn't raise suspicions. Additionally, the stress of business and his not always healthy diet would make the story even more credible. No one would question the sudden death of a middle-aged businessman from natural causes. Savannah meticulously noted names of substances and methods of obtaining them. her beautiful face illuminated by the bluish light of the computer screen. "I need something I can administer gradually without arousing suspicion," she thought, lightly biting her lower lip. "Something that looks like a natural disease progressing." A noise in the hallway made Savannah quickly minimize the browser window. It was just one of the maids passing with the vacuum cleaner, but the scare reminded her of the need for extreme caution. She closed the folder with the will and replaced it exactly in the position where she had found it. No one could suspect that she had discovered the change. This meant continuing to act normally with Garrison, perhaps even with more affection and attention than usual. He could not notice her discontent or the anger that now boiled inside her. The plan required patience and coolness, two qualities that Savannah possessed in abundance. Composed, she reopened the search window, now more specific. She was looking for substances available without a prescription, that would leave no traces, and whose effects could be confused with common health problems. The list was surprisingly long, reflecting human knowledge about poisoning that dated back centuries of history. Who would have thought it would be so easy to find this information? She murmured to herself, her golden eyes eagerly scanning the search results. "It's almost as if the world wanted to help me solve my problem." The hours passed quickly as Savannah immersed herself in her macabre research. It was almost noon when she finally felt satisfied with the acquired knowledge. She had chosen the perfect poison, a substance derived from a common plant, easily obtained, which in small doses would cause symptoms similar to a degenerative disease, and, in a larger final dose, would cause an apparently natural cardiac arrest. She carefully erased the browsing history and closed all compromising windows. Her plan was beginning to take shape, but there were still practical details to resolve. How to obtain the poison without raising suspicions? How to administer it to Garrison consistently? How long would it take for the plan to complete? These questions would require careful reflection. Savannah rose from the chair, stretching her elegant body like a satisfied cat after a successful hunt. Her reflection in the decorative wall mirror showed a composed, serene woman, with no indication of the internal storm that agitated her thoughts. "You wanted to change the rules, Garrison," she said to the empty space of the office, a cold smile forming on her perfect lips. "But you won't live to see the final result of the game." The phone rang, startling her momentarily. It was Garrison, calling to let her know he would arrive earlier for dinner and that he had news to share. Savannah responded with the sweet and loving voice she reserved exclusively for her husband, ensuring that she would prepare something special to celebrate his early return. The ease with which she transitioned between the woman planning a murder and the dedicated wife was disturbing even to herself. She hung up the phone and observed the garden through the window, imagining what her life would be like as a rich widow. International trips, exclusive parties, perhaps a new love, younger and more attractive this time, someone with whom she wouldn't need to feign interest. The prospect was tempting enough to justify the crime she was planning to commit. Savannah returned to the computer one last time, now discreetly searching for stores selling natural products and medicinal herbs in the city. She found exactly what she was looking for, an establishment away from downtown, frequented mainly by alternative medicine enthusiasts, where she could acquire the necessary ingredients without raising suspicion. "Just a few more weeks," she promised herself, noting the store's address on her personal cell phone, "and everything that should be mine will finally be in my hands." The morning sun illuminated the luxurious kitchen of the Harrington mansion, highlighting the gleaming appliances and immaculate marble surfaces. Savannah, with her black hair tied in an unpretentiously elegant bun, moved through the space, with the ease of someone who dominated every inch of that territory. She wore a green silk outfit that enhanced her golden eyes and contrasted with her fair skin. The night before, she had announced to Garrison that she would prepare a special lunch for him to take to work. A gesture of love, she had explained with a calculated smile. Her husband, obviously touched by the unusual attention, readily accepted the offer. What he didn't know was that, in the previous 2 weeks, Savannah had discreetly acquired the components necessary for her macabre plan, visiting the natural product store she had found online. Now, with the lethal ingredients carefully hidden in a vitamin bottle in the kitchen cabinet, she prepared to execute the first phase of her plan. Her movements were precise, almost choreographed, as she separated the ingredients for the sandwich on the counter. "Simplicity is the soul of sophistication," she murmured to herself, selecting the artisanal whole-grain bread she knew was Garrison's favorite, and also the best camouflage for a perfect murder. With meticulous attention to detail, Savannah began preparing what appeared to be an innocent gourmet sandwich. She sliced the bread with precision, spread a generous layer of olive pâté, enough to mask any strange taste the poison might have. She added slices of imported smoked ham, Swiss cheese, and fresh arugula leaves. With each layer, her eyes checked the kitchen door, ensuring that none of the employees would enter unexpectedly. The mansion was quiet that morning. She had dismissed the cook, insisting that she wanted to prepare something special for her husband with her own hands. When the crucial moment came, Savannah opened the cabinet and removed the vitamin bottle. Her hands, always steady, trembled slightly as she opened the container. The whitish powder looked harmless, exactly as planned. According to her research, the dose she was about to administer would not be immediately fatal. It was just the beginning of a process that would gradually weaken Garrison, preparing him for the final blow that would come weeks later. She looked at the clock. She had exactly 8 minutes before Garrison came down for breakfast. Time enough. "Her pinch today, another tomorrow," she whispered, carefully sprinkling the powder over the olive pâté and mixing it with the tip of a knife. As my grandmother taught, patience is the virtue of winners. The sound of footsteps upstairs alerted Savannah. Garrison was awake. With quick and precise movements, she finished the sandwich, adding a second slice of bread over the deadly filling. Her heart was beating fast, not from regret, but from the adrenaline of crossing a line she had never imagined crossing so deliberately. There was something strangely empowering about the feeling. She carefully wrapped the sandwich in wax paper, tying it with a decorative string like a macabre gift. She placed it in a small artisanal paper bag and wrote, "With love, P," on the outside. A theatrical touch she knew Garrison would appreciate. Quickly, she put the poison bottle in her robe pocket to return it to its hiding place later. She meticulously cleaned any trace of her activity, ensuring the counter was spotless. When Garrison entered the kitchen, he found his wife preparing fresh coffee, the sandwich already arranged on the table along with fresh fruit and a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. The stage was set. "Good morning, my love," Garrison crooned, surprising her with a kiss on the neck. "What a wonderful smell. Colombian coffee?" "Yes, the one you like," Savannah responded, turning with her most radiant smile. "And I prepared a special sandwich for you to take to the office. I know you've been working too hard." Garrison sat at the table, visibly touched by his wife's gesture. At 50, he still maintained a vigorous appearance, with grey hair at the temples that gave him a distinguished air and a physique maintained by regular swimming sessions. His dark eyes, usually shrewd in business, softened considerably when he looked at his young wife. Savannah watched him eat breakfast while they chatted about trivialities. The company's new project, the possibility of a trip to the Greek islands next summer, the art exhibition she planned to visit during the afternoon. The normalcy of the scene contrasted dramatically with what was really happening, the beginning of a meticulously planned murder. When Garrison finished his coffee and stood up to leave, Savannah handed him the bag with the poisoned sandwich, allowing her fingers to touch his for longer than necessary. A small detail she knew he would notice and appreciate. "I hope you enjoy it," she said, adjusting her husband's tie with false dedication. "I use that olive pâté you always praise when we go to the Italian restaurant." "You're wonderful, you know that?" Garrison replied, holding her by the waist. "What did I do to deserve such an attentive wife?" Savannah accompanied Garrison to the mansion's door, waving as he got into the black Porsche and disappeared through the automated gate. As soon as the car vanished from sight, her smile fell away like a dropping mask. She went back inside, climbed the stairs, and went straight to her private closet, where she had hidden a small locked diary with the details of her plan. She noted the date and the first administration of the poison, mentally calculating how long it would take for the effects to appear. According to her research, the first symptoms, fatigue, mild mental confusion, slight tremors, would emerge in about a week. No one, not even Garrison, would associate these signs with poisoning. The doctor would probably diagnose stress or some mild neurological disorder, and when the fatal moment finally came, Everything would appear as the natural progression of a disease, unfortunately discovered too late. "The first step has been taken," she wrote in the diary with her elegant, slanted handwriting. "When it's done, I'll never again need to pretend love for someone I don't desire." Meanwhile, downtown, Garrison parked his car in the underground garage of the imposing building that housed his company's headquarters. The businessman carried his Italian leather briefcase in one hand and the bag with the sandwich in the other, genuinely anticipating the lunch prepared by Savannah. In recent months, he had noticed a certain distance from his wife, attributing it to the long hours he spent at the office finalizing the project for a new charitable foundation, an old dream that was finally beginning to materialize. That morning's unexpected attention seemed to indicate a reconciliation, a return to the harmony that had characterized the first months of their marriage. Garrison didn't realize that his fortune was the only aspect of his person that really interested his wife. As he walked through the corridors of the 18th floor, greeting employees with the affability that had made him beloved by his subordinates, he thought about how he would compensate Savannah for the loving gesture. Perhaps that emerald necklace she had admired in the jewelry store window last month. "Mr. Harrington, your video conference with the Japanese investors begins in 15 minutes, his secretary reminded him as she saw him pass. "Thank you, Delaney." "Please don't let anyone interrupt me during the meeting," he replied, placing the sandwich on his office desk. "This special lunch will have to wait a little longer." The morning passed quickly between meetings, phone calls, and financial report analyses. When the clock struck noon, Garrison finally had a moment of free time in his frantic schedule. He sat comfortably in his leather chair, unbuttoning his jacket and slightly loosening his tie. He looked at the bag Savannah had prepared, feeling a wave of affection for his young wife. Despite the age difference, he genuinely believed he had found a partner to share the rest of his life with. Someone who, despite not having children like his first wife, had brought color and joy back to his days after the dark period of mourning. He carefully removed the sandwich from the wrapping, admiring the meticulous presentation. The "With Love" P written on the bag brought a smile to his face, lined by time and responsibilities. However, before he could take the first bite, his phone rang. It was the financial director with urgent news about the acquisition they had been negotiating for months. Reluctantly, Garrison rewrapped the sandwich. "It seems our meeting will have to be postponed again, my friend," he said to the sandwich, as if the food could hear him. "I hope you're as patient as my wife." 3 hours later, Garrison was finally preparing to leave the office. The emergency meeting had stretched far beyond what was expected, but with positive results. The acquisition was practically guaranteed, opening new possibilities for expansion for his companies. He had completely forgotten about lunch, now stored in his briefcase along with important documents. He only remembered it when he was already in the elevator, going down to the ground floor. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. He decided he would savor the sandwich during his journey home, a small pleasure to compensate for the exhausting day. While crossing the building lobby toward the exit, Garrison greeted the security guard with a nod. The afternoon sun was already beginning to set, casting golden shadows through the glass doors of the entrance. It was then that his eyes caught something unusual. A small figure huddled against the outer wall, partially visible through the revolving doors. "Fletcher, who is that child out there?" he asked the security guard, frowning in concern. Beggar, Mr. Harrington. Arrived a few hours ago, looks very ill. I was about to call social services," replied the uniformed man, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Something in the scene deeply touched Garrison. He had grown up in modest conditions before building his empire, and had never forgotten the difficulties of his childhood. It was precisely why he had recently decided to dedicate a large part of his fortune to charitable causes, a decision that, without his knowledge, had sealed his fate in his wife's hands. Ignoring the usual protocol of not getting personally involved in cases like this, Garrison walked decisively out of the building. As he approached, he realized it was a girl, no more than 12 years old, in a state of evident malnutrition. Her brown skin was pale, her eyes closed, her emaciated body trembling slightly despite the afternoon heat. She seemed to be on the edge between consciousness and fainting. The sight provoked in Garrison an instant compassion, mixed with the memory of his own daughter, who had died along with his first wife in a car accident years before. This child would be approximately the same age that his Eliana would be now. "Hello, little one, are you okay?" asked Garrison, crouching down to the girl's height. The large brown eyes opened slowly, revealing a mixture of distrust and hope. I'm hungry, sir," she whispered in a weak, almost inaudible voice. Ainsley looked at the well-dressed man with a mixture of surprise and caution. On the streets, she had learned that kindness rarely came without a price, especially from strangers in expensive clothes. However, something in this man's eyes seemed different. There was genuine concern that she rarely encountered. Her stomach contracted painfully, reminding her that she had been without a decent meal for days. She tried to sit more upright, regaining a bit of dignity despite her desperate situation. Garrison, for his part, felt a commotion that he hadn't experienced for years. The sight of that child abandoned to her own fate in front of the building, where millions were negotiated daily, suddenly seemed obscene to him, a contrast that evidenced everything that was wrong in society. Without thinking twice, he opened his briefcase and removed the bag with the sandwich that Savannah had prepared. "Here, little one. It's not much, but it should help until we find something more substantial for you," he offered, extending the carefully prepared package. For me?" asked Ainsley, eyes widened in disbelief as if someone were offering her an inestimable treasure. With trembling hands, Ainsley accepted the unexpected gift. The artisanal paper seemed thin and delicate between her calloused fingers, so different from the crumpled and dirty packaging she occasionally found in the trash. She untied the decorative string with reverent care, as if fearing the food might disappear at any moment. The aroma of fresh bread hit her nostrils, making her stomach audibly growl. However, when she fully opened the wrapping and brought the sandwich close to her face, something made her hesitate. Years on the streets had sharpened her senses in a way that people with normal lives would hardly understand. Surviving meant recognizing dangers invisible to others: spoiled food, contaminated drink, intentions hidden behind smiles. And there was something in that sandwich, an almost imperceptible odor beneath the layers of other aromas, that triggered her survival instincts. It wasn't the smell of spoiled food, which she knew well. It was something more subtle, more alarming. Ainsley wrinkled her nose, moving the sandwich slightly away from herself, her fragile body waging an internal battle between devastating hunger and the instinct for preservation. "What's wrong? Aren't you hungry?" asked Garrison, genuinely surprised by the hesitation. "I'm starving, sir," Ainsley replied with painful sincerity. "But there's something strange about this sandwich." Garrison observed the girl with growing perplexity. Logic dictated that someone hungry to the point of fainting would grab any food offered without question. However, there was this child, refusing what could be her only meal of the day. The situation defied his understanding. Perhaps, he thought, she had some kind of allergy or dietary restriction, or perhaps it was just the natural fear of accepting food from strangers, something that ironically demonstrated a wisdom that many adults lacked. Garrison crouched down again, trying to establish a connection with the small beggar, whose eyes now examined the sandwich with a mixture of desire and distrust. "Something strange. What do you mean?" "My wife prepared it this morning," he explained, unable to hide the confusion in his voice. "I can't explain it properly, sir," Ainsley replied, still holding the sandwich as if it were simultaneously precious and dangerous. "It has a different smell. Not like spoiled food, it's something else." Garrison extended his hand, silently asking to examine the sandwich. Ainsley reluctantly returned it, watching as the man carefully smelled the food. To him, there was nothing beyond the pleasant aroma of fresh bread, smoked ham, and the distinct odor of olives in the pâté. No sign of the strange smell the girl had detected. Confused, he offered the sandwich back to her, closely observing her reaction. Ainsley accepted it with the same trembling hands, but still didn't eat, her large brown eyes now fixed on Garrison's face, as if searching for some sign of understanding. "If you're so afraid, I can buy something else for you," offered Garrison, still intrigued by the situation. "It's not ordinary fear, sir," Ainsley replied, shaking her head slightly. "On the streets, I learned to recognize dangers. And this sandwich, I think there's something in it that shouldn't be there." A chill ran down Garrison's spine. The conviction in the girl's weak voice was disturbing, especially considering her debilitated condition. It didn't seem to be just the irrational fear of a child, but something deeper, more instinctive. He took the sandwich again, opening it to examine the filling. Everything looked perfectly normal. The same layers of ham, cheese, and arugula that Savannah occasionally prepared when she was in a good mood. Nothing visually indicated any problem. Still, the certainty with which the beggar had spoken left him inexplicably uneasy. "What exactly do you think is in this sandwich?" Garrison asked, his voice now more serious, almost a whisper. Ainsley hesitated, clearly aware of the weight of her next words. Her eyes met Garrison's, and in that moment, hunger and desperation gave way to surprising lucidity. "Poison, sir. I think your sandwich is poisoned." The words hit Garrison like a physical blow. Poison? It was absurd, completely irrational. Savannah had prepared that sandwich with her own hands in their home kitchen. Who could have had the opportunity to tamper with it? The idea was so outlandish that his first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss the statement as the delusion of a mind affected by hunger and abandonment. However, something stopped him. Perhaps the absolute certainty in the girl's eyes, perhaps some intuition of his own that he didn't fully understand. Garrison felt his heart race as a whirlwind of thoughts invaded his mind. He remembered the recent will he had modified, redirecting much of his fortune to charitable causes, instead of leaving it to Savannah. He hadn't mentioned the change to his wife, but the documents had briefly been in his home office. Was it possible that... No, it was too terrible a suspicion to entertain, even for a moment. "Are you suggesting my wife would try to poison me?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to the girl. "I don't know who did it, sir," Ainsley replied, her eyes never leaving his. "I only know what I feel, and I feel there's something dangerous in this sandwich." Garrison fell silent, his mind working furiously. The accusation was absurd, certainly. But what if it wasn't? Savannah's unusually affectionate attitude that morning, the sudden interest in preparing his lunch when she normally barely entered the kitchen. And there were also the small changes in her behavior in recent weeks, since he had altered his will. Small signs he had ignored, looks, hesitations, conversations abruptly interrupted when he entered a room. Would they be coincidences or pieces of a darker puzzle? The businessman looked again at the scrawny girl in front of him, whose intuition now cast a disturbing shadow over his entire married life. It seemed impossible that this street child, who had never seen Savannah, could make such a baseless accusation. And even more impossible seemed the idea that his young and beautiful wife, whom he believed he loved and was loved by, could wish for his death. "How can you be so certain?" insisted Garrison, his voice now a mixture of disbelief and growing alarm. "I've lived on the street since my mother died, sir," explained Ainsley, the strength of her conviction contrasting with the fragility of her body. "I learned to distinguish what is safe from what isn't. That's how we stay alive." Garrison stared at the sandwich in his hands, now transformed from a gesture of love into a possible instrument of death. Doubt had definitely settled in his chest, along with a feeling of betrayal so deep that it became physical. The girl could be wrong, of course. It could just be delirium caused by extreme hunger. But what if she was right? Could he risk his life based on the assumption that his wife would not be capable of such atrocity? He was not a man accustomed to making decisions without concrete evidence. In his business, he always demanded data, projections, detailed analyses before acting. Here, however, he had only the word of an unknown child against years of marriage. It was an impossible equation to solve at that moment, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. He needed to discover the truth, regardless of how painful it might be. "What's your name, little one?" he suddenly asked, his decision made. "Ainsley, sir," replied the girl, visibly confused by the change in conversation tone. "Well, Ainsley, I think you've just lived up to your name," said Garrison, carefully putting the sandwich back in the bag. "Come with me. First we'll find something safe for you to eat, and then we'll find out if I'm really a man marked for death." The afternoon sun was beginning to set when Garrison's black Porsche crossed the mansion gates, much earlier than his usual return time. Beside him in the passenger seat, Ainsley watched open-mouthed as the property revealed itself before her eyes. The immaculate gardens, the ornamental fountain, the imposing three-story building with its Greco-Roman columns and enormous windows. The girl, still weak but considerably revived after the meal Garrison had bought her at a restaurant near his office, could hardly believe the contrast between the life she led on the streets and the luxury she now witnessed. The businessman, meanwhile, maintained a grave countenance, his tense hands on the steering wheel, betraying the emotional storm he faced internally. The bag containing the suspicious sandwich rested on the center console between them, now an object loaded with dark meanings. During the journey, Garrison had briefly explained his plan to Ainsley. They would confront Savannah directly without warning, to observe her reaction when asked to eat the very sandwich she had prepared. It was a risky strategy, based more on intuition than the business logic that normally guided his decisions, but the suspicion installed in his heart allowed him no other alternative. "Are you ready?" asked Garrison, parking the car in front of the main entrance. "We don't know how she'll react when she sees you." "I'm used to people not liking me at first sight, sir," replied Ainsley, with wisdom beyond her years. "But I've never been in such a big house. It's like a fairy tale palace." Savannah was in the back garden supervising the landscaper's work when she heard the characteristic sound of Garrison's Porsche engine. She frowned, consulting the diamond watch on her wrist. It was only 4 in the afternoon, at least 3 hours before her husband usually returned. The unexpected arrival caused her immediate discomfort. She had meticulously planned her day, including time to verify that the poison vial was well hidden and to continue her research on the next steps of her macabre plan. The change in routine was not anticipated. With a casual gesture, she dismissed the landscaper and quickly headed to the house, adjusting the petrol blue silk dress she wore and checking her reflection in one of the decorative mirrors in the hallway. His mind raced quickly, calculating possibilities. Had Garrison felt some effect of the poison earlier than expected? Had he discovered something about her intentions? Or was it just an early return without any sinister meaning? She composed her expression into the welcoming smile she reserved exclusively for her husband, a mask so well rehearsed that sometimes she almost believed it herself. When she opened the front door, however, the smile froze on her lips. Garrison wasn't alone. "Garrison, darling, what a pleasant surprise," she began with false cheer, her eyes fixed on the small, bedraggled figure beside her husband. "But who is this child?" "This is Ainsley," Garrison replied dryly, his voice devoid of its usual affection. "I found her fainting from hunger in front of my office. I thought it best to bring her home." Savannah felt a chill run down her spine at Garrison's unusual tone, but kept the frozen smile on her perfect face while quickly analyzing the situation. The beggar's presence was an irritating inconvenience, but nothing she couldn't manage. Probably another of her husband's charitable impulses, which had become increasingly frequent and unbearable in recent times. Her mind was already formulating a strategy to deal with the intruder. Perhaps suggest sending her to some charity institution, accompanied by a generous donation, of course. Anything to get her out of her house as quickly as possible. With a gesture that was meant to be gracious, but couldn't completely hide her revulsion, Savannah made room for them to enter, her golden eyes critically evaluating Ainsley's dirty bare feet, tattered dress, and tangled hair. The contrast between the girl and the luxurious environment of the mansion couldn't be more striking. "Garrison, may I speak with you in private for a moment?" she asked, her smile faltering as she lightly touched her husband's arm. "It's a domestic matter." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Ainsley," he replied firmly, heading to the main room without waiting for an answer. "After all, she may have saved my life today." Savannah's mind immediately went on alert with those enigmatic words. Saved his life? What exactly did that mean? Trying to maintain her composure, she followed her husband and the girl to the living room, where Garrison indicated that Ainsley should sit on one of the Italian leather sofas. The little one obeyed hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the luxury surrounding her, her large eyes scanning the expensive paintings on the walls, the art objects, the furniture that probably cost more than she would ever see in her entire life on the streets. Savannah remained standing, her tense posture betraying the irritation she was trying to hide beneath a facade of politeness. Her mind was working frantically, trying to understand what was happening. Garrison's behavior was completely atypical. The hard look, the tense jaw, the emotional distance he seemed to have placed between them. "Garrison, you can't be serious," Savannah hissed, momentarily abandoning the pretense of hospitality. bringing a beggar into our home. Have you thought about the risks, the diseases, the security? Interesting that you mentioned security, Savannah, Garrison replied, his tone dangerously calm as he removed something from his briefcase. Because that's exactly what I want to talk about. The sandwich, still wrapped in artisanal paper, emerged from Garrison's briefcase, being placed on the center table as if it were evidence in a trial. Savannah fixed her eyes on the familiar package, a sudden understanding beginning to form in her mind. Her husband hadn't eaten the poisoned sandwich. That was obvious from the fact that he was there, perfectly lucid and apparently healthy. But how did this relate to the presence of the ragged girl in her living room? Savannah swallowed hard, feeling her mouth suddenly dry. Instinctively, she took a step back, as if wanting to create distance between herself and the accusing object on the table. Her golden eyes jumped from the sandwich to Garrison's face, then to Ainsley, who was watching her with a disturbing intensity, and back to her husband. The unasked question hung in the air, almost palpable in the tension that now filled the luxurious room. "What's wrong with the lunch I prepared for you this morning?" she finally asked, struggling to sound natural, confused, innocent. "Didn't you like it? Is that why you brought it back?" "Actually, I didn't get to try it," Garrison explained, his eyes never leaving his wife's face, looking for any telling sign. "I was about to offer it to Ainsley, who was fainting from hunger when she noticed something peculiar." A heavy silence fell over the room as Savannah processed this information. Her eyes narrowed slightly, now focused on the girl who held her gaze without wavering. What exactly could this child have noticed? It was impossible that the poison had visibly altered the sandwich. She had been extremely careful with the dosage and mixing it with the olive pâté. Unless... Savannah felt her heart race as she considered the possibility that the poison might have some odor she hadn't perceived, but that might be detectable to more acute senses. The golden eyes of the beautiful woman narrowed even more, now feverishly calculating her options. Deny, attack, deflect. Her mind, trained in manipulation, was already formulating plausible explanations. A bad joke from the girl, an attempt to get attention, perhaps even an allergy that made her confuse the smell of some ingredient. "Garrison, you're not seriously giving credit to what a beggar says about my food, are you?" she asked with a forced laugh, trying to introduce a note of absurdity to the situation. "It's ridiculous. What could she possibly know?" "She says the sandwich is poisoned, Savannah," Garrison replied directly, his voice carrying a gravity she had never heard before, "and I want you to prove it's not." The words hit Savannah like a physical punch, momentarily stealing the air from her lungs, poisoned. The accusation hung in the luxurious air of the room, as incongruous with the expensive furniture and artwork on the walls as the little beggar sitting on the Italian sofa. Savannah's mind, normally agile in formulating lies and manipulations, now seemed locked in a loop of panic. How could she have been discovered? What supernatural sense did this street child possess to detect what had been so meticulously hidden? For a fleeting moment, she considered confessing, begging for forgiveness, claiming a temporary mental breakdown. But the born survivor inside her quickly discarded that option. Confession would mean imprisonment, ruin, the loss of everything she had worked for. No, she needed to stay the course, double down, trust in her manipulation skills that had never failed before. "Poisoned," she repeated, allowing outrage and indignation to color her voice as she placed her hands on her hips. "That's the most absurd and offensive thing I've ever heard. How can you believe this?" "Simple," Garrison replied, calmly unwrapping the sandwich and extending it toward her. "Eat it yourself." Savannah stared at the offered sandwich as if it were a snake ready to strike. Her mind worked frantically, seeking a way out of the trap she found herself in. Refusing to eat would be practically a confession of guilt. But eating meant ingesting the poison she herself had placed. Poison that, according to her research, wasn't immediately fatal in a single dose, but would certainly cause visible symptoms within minutes. Time enough for Garrison to witness the proof of her betrayal. The impasse seemed insurmountable. Her golden eyes scanned the room, as if looking for a physical escape route, though she knew the real escape needed was from the situation, not the space. She saw Garrison, his normally gentle face now hardened by a determination she had never witnessed before. She saw Ainsley, small and fragile, but with a look of wisdom and judgment that seemed to cut through all the layers of lies Savannah had built over the years. And finally she saw the sandwich itself, the weapon she had created, and that now turned against her in a cruel irony. "This is ridiculous. I won't participate in this. This circus," she exclaimed, crossing her arms defensively. "You're accusing me of trying to poison you based on the word of a street child." "I'm not accusing you of anything, Savannah," Garrison responded with false calmness. "I'm just asking you to eat the sandwich that you yourself prepared with such care this morning. What's the problem?" A tense silence filled the room as the standoff continued. Savannah knew that each second of hesitation only confirmed Garrison's suspicions, but she couldn't force herself to take the sandwich. Her golden eyes, normally hypnotizing, now revealed a growing panic that no amount of control could completely disguise. The mask of the devoted wife was visibly cracking, revealing fragments of the true Savannah underneath, calculating, cold, desperate. It was at this moment that Ainsley, who had remained silent watching the verbal duel, finally spoke. Her voice, though childish and still weak from hunger recently appeased, carried a clarity that cut through the tension in the room like a knife. "If there's nothing wrong with the sandwich, why can't you eat it?" asked Ainsley, the simplicity of the question highlighting its irrefutable logic. "Mr. Garrison was going to eat it today. Wouldn't you eat what you made for your husband?" The little girl's simple words hit Savannah like a physical blow. The innocent and direct question exposed the absurdity of her refusal, eliminating any possibility of evasion or rationalization. Garrison watched attentively, his eyes now fixed on his wife's face, cataloguing every micro-expression that might betray the truth behind the facade. For a fleeting moment, Savannah considered making a scene, throwing the sandwich on the floor, accusing her husband of insanity, demanding that the beggar be removed from her house immediately. But something in Garrison's gaze stopped her, an unwavering determination she had never seen before. It was the look of a man who would not rest until he discovered the truth, regardless of the cost. And in that moment, Savannah knew there was only one path forward. A desperate path, but one that offered a tenuous possibility of salvation. "This is completely absurd. But fine," she finally said, forcing an exasperated tone. "If that's what I need to do to end this madness, I'll eat the damn sandwich." With a studied naturalness that masked her inner terror, Savannah took the sandwich from Garrison's hands. It felt as heavy as lead between her fingers, an instrument of death now turning against its creator. For a fleeting moment, she considered pretending to take a bite, hiding the food in her sleeve, or simply dropping it accidentally. But Garrison's attentive gaze and, surprisingly, Ainsley's even more perceptive look made any trick impossible. She was effectively cornered, trapped in the snare she herself had constructed. With one last silent prayer, hoping against all logic that her research on the poison was wrong, that somehow it wouldn't work, or that the effects would take longer to appear, Savannah brought the sandwich to her mouth and took a deliberately small bite. "Satisfied now?" she asked after swallowing, her heart beating so hard she was certain it was audible in the quietness of the room. "I can assure you there's nothing wrong with it." "Continue," insisted Garrison, his voice firm and inflexible. "One bite isn't enough to prove anything. Eat more." Forced to continue her charade, Savannah took another bite, slightly larger this time. The taste of the olive pâté, which she would normally enjoy, now seemed like ashes in her mouth. Each chew, each swallow sent more of the poison into her own system, a fact whose irony was not lost on her agitated mind. She, who had planned every detail with such care, was now forced to ingest her own lethal potion under the watchful eye of her intended victim. 1 minute passed, then 2. Savannah forced a triumphant smile, trying to ignore the strange sensation that was beginning to spread through her body. First a subtle tingling in her lips, then a slight dizziness that she desperately tried to attribute to the stress of the situation. "See, nothing happened. I hope you're satisfied with this little drama," she said, her voice projecting a confidence she no longer felt. "Now, can we please discuss how to handle this situation?" "Wait a bit longer," replied Garrison, his eyes never leaving hers. "If there's really nothing wrong with the sandwich, there's no rush, right?" The 3rd minute brought the first indisputable sign that something was terribly wrong. Cold sweat began to form on Savannah's perfectly made-up forehead. while the tingling in her lips spread to her tongue and throat. The dizziness intensified, causing her to discreetly lean against the wall to maintain her balance. Ainsley watched with wide eyes but without surprise, as if she were witnessing the confirmation of something she already knew to be true. Garrison, for his part, maintained an indescribable expression, a mixture of growing horror at the confirmation of his suspicions and a deep sadness at the collapse of everything he believed to be true in his marriage. Savannah tried to speak, perhaps to offer one last lie or explanation, but her tongue felt strangely heavy in her mouth. Her golden eyes, normally so controlled and calculating, now revealed pure, primitive panic. "Garrison, I don't feel well," she managed to say, her voice now slurred, the words slightly jumbled. "I think I need to lie down." "What did you put in the sandwich, Savannah?" asked Garrison, his voice carrying a pain so deep it seemed physical. "What did you try to do to me?" The question hung in the air like a sentence, but Savannah no longer had enough control over her body to respond adequately. His legs began to shake, unable to support his weight. He took an unstable step forward, seeking support, but his motor coordination was already too compromised. His eyes now unfocused, momentarily fixed on Ainsley, the small beggar who had destroyed his perfect plan with nothing but her intuition sharpened by survival on the streets. A wave of hatred passed through his weakened body, quickly replaced by growing terror at what he had done to himself. The poison was faster than he had anticipated, or perhaps the dose in the sandwich was larger than he had originally planned. The luxurious room began to spin around him, the contours of furniture and art objects mixing in a confused whirlwind of colors and shapes. I never, he tried to say, the words now almost incomprehensible as his facial muscles began to fail. "Please, hospital." With a final desperate look at Garrison, Savannah felt her legs finally give way. Her elegant body, always so carefully controlled, collapsed on the expensive Persian rug like a puppet with its strings cut. Her golden eyes, still open but rapidly losing focus, fixed on the ornate ceiling of the room as consciousness gradually escaped. The last coherent thought that crossed her mind was a bitter irony. She who had planned every detail of her life with such precision, from conquering Garrison to his premature death, now succumbed to her own trap, defeated by a street child who possessed nothing but sharp instincts and hunger. Garrison stood motionless for a moment, as if frozen by the surreal scene unfolding before him. His wife, the woman he believed he loved and by whom he thought he was loved, lay unconscious on the floor, victim of a poison she herself had prepared for him. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute that his mind struggled to process it entirely. In an instant his whole world crumbled. His marriage revealed itself as an elaborate farce, his home a setting for an almost perfect crime, his trust a weapon used against himself. It was Ainsley's voice that finally pulled him from his stupor, the girl now standing beside the fallen Savannah, her large brown eyes revealing concern but not surprise. "Mr. Garrison, we need to call for help," she said with surprising firmness for someone so young. "She won't die now, but she needs a doctor quickly." How did you know?" Garrison began, unable to fully formulate the many questions flooding his mind. "On the streets we learn to recognize dangers," Ainsley responded simply. "Now please, call an ambulance." The clinical aroma of disinfectant and medications hung in the air of the hospital room where Savannah had been admitted for 5 days. The heart monitor emitted rhythmic beeps, confirming that the beautiful woman had survived her own deadly trap. The doctors called her recovery miraculous. The poison she had ingested was potent enough to kill, but the rapid medical intervention, combined with the relatively small dose she had consumed in the sandwich, allowed her to survive after spending 3 days in critical condition. Savannah observed the urban landscape through the window of the private room, her black hair now devoid of its usual shine, her once perfect skin now pale and marked by physical suffering. She wore a simple hospital gown, a humiliating contrast to the designer clothes she used to wear. Her golden eyes, once hypnotizing in their calculated beauty, now showed a mixture of exhaustion and something more complex, something close to fear. During the 5 days of hospitalization, Garrison had not appeared once. No flowers, no cards, no phone calls, just absolute silence that, for Savannah, was more deafening than any accusation. "Where are you, Garrison?" She whispered to the window. her fingers nervously drumming on the windowsill. "Come confront me at once, or are you just waiting for me to rot in this room?" The door to the room suddenly opened, making Savannah turn with a start. Her heart immediately accelerated upon seeing Garrison standing in the doorway, wearing an impeccable dark suit that contrasted with the paleness of his face. The businessman's expression was indescribable, a rigid mask that revealed little of the emotional storm behind it. His eyes, normally warm when looking at her, now seemed like two fragments of obsidian, black, hard, impenetrable. Without saying a word, Garrison entered the room and closed the door behind him. The sound of the latch echoed in the tense silence that settled between them. Savannah straightened herself in bed, instinctively adjusting her disheveled hair, a reflection of her constant concern with appearances even in that critical moment. They were two actors who had shared the stage for years, but now one of them had completely abandoned the script, leaving the other without prepared lines. "The doctors say you'll survive," Garrison finally said, his voice devoid of any identifiable emotion. "Ironically, you chose a poison that works slowly. If you had opted for something faster, you would be dead before we reached the hospital." "Garrison, I can explain," began Savannah, her voice still slightly hoarse from the effects of the poison. "I don't know what happened to me. I wasn't thinking clearly." Garrison raised his hand in a gesture that silenced Savannah instantly. He walked to the window, observing the city outside for a few moments, as if seeking from it the strength to face the conversation to come. The physical distance between them, just a few meters, seemed like an insurmountable abyss. Savannah watched her husband with growing apprehension, her mind still foggy from the medications trying to calculate the best approach. Emotional appeal? Partial confession? Complete denial? Each option seemed equally risky before the man who clearly was no longer the same one she had known, or thought she knew. The Savannah of before, confident in her power of manipulation, had been replaced by this cornered version, surrounded by hospital machines and the weight of her own exposed betrayal. "5 days," Garrison finally said, still with his back to her. "For 5 days I tried to understand how the woman who shared my bed, my home, my life, tried to kill me for money. And I still can't comprehend it." "It wasn't just for money," protested Savannah, tears beginning to form in her golden eyes. Genuine tears, or just another performance not even she would know. "It was the will. You changed everything without consulting me. You were going to leave almost everything to charities. How could you do this to me?" Garrison turned slowly, his eyes finally meeting hers. There was something in that look that made Savannah involuntarily tremble. It wasn't hatred as she expected, not even anger. It was something worse, total and absolute understanding. He saw her now, really saw her, for the first time since they met. Saw beyond the carefully cultivated beauty, beyond the rehearsed smiles and sweet words. Saw the true Savannah, calculating, greedy, capable of killing for money. And nothing could be more terrifying for her than this recognition, this complete exposure of who she really was. Garrison approached the bed, stopping at a safe distance, as if she were contagious. His eyes never left hers, forcing her to maintain eye contact despite the growing discomfort. "Now I understand why you never questioned why a man like me would marry a woman 20 years younger," said Garrison, his voice low but perfectly audible in the silence of the room. "You assumed I was an old fool, blinded by the beauty of a young woman, easy to manipulate, easy to control. It never occurred to you that I might see beyond your facade, did it?" "That's not true," replied Savannah, her voice choked by tears that now flowed freely. "At the beginning perhaps it was like that, but later I really started to feel something for you. Please, you have to believe me." Garrison's bitter laugh cut through the air like a blade, making Savannah shrink slightly. He took another step toward the bed, his eyes never leaving hers. The intensity of that gaze was almost physical, like a weight on her chest already debilitated by the poison. Savannah realized that for the first time since they met, the roles had completely reversed. It was she who was trying to read his intentions. It was she who was trying to guess the next move. It was she who felt vulnerable and exposed. Garrison was no longer the docile and predictable husband she manipulated so easily. He was a stranger, an adversary, a relentless judge before whom no defense was possible. "I want you to tell me everything, Savannah," he demanded, his voice now firm and authoritative. Every detail of your plan. When you decided to kill me, how you got the poison, what you intended to do afterward, everything. Why? She asked, suddenly suspicious despite her vulnerable position. So you can use it against me in court. I'm your wife, Garrison. You can't testify against me. A cold smile, so different from the warm smile Garrison used to direct at her, formed on his lips. He calmly walked to a chair near the bed and sat down, crossing his legs in a relaxed pose that dramatically contrasted with the palpable tension in the environment. From an inside pocket of his jacket, he removed a small digital recorder, placing it on the bedside table. The small object seemed absurdly threatening in its simplicity. Savannah looked at him with growing horror, instantly comprehending Garrison's intention. "I'm not a lawyer, but I have the best ones at my service," he explained calmly, as if discussing the weather. "And they assured me that I can indeed testify against you. As for the recording, well, it will merely corroborate the toxicology report that already confirmed the presence of the poison, the same poison found in our kitchen cabinet, stored in a vitamin bottle." "You searched our house?" asked Savannah, momentary indignation overcoming her fear. "How could you do that?" The days following Savannah's hospitalization had been a whirlwind for Garrison. While his wife fought for her life in the hospital, he, accompanied by private investigators, and later by the police, had methodically combed through the mansion in search of evidence. They found not only the bottle with the remaining poison, but also the small diary, where Savannah had meticulously noted the details of her plan, including the exact dosage and administration schedule she intended to follow. Her personal computer, seized with judicial authorization, revealed her search history about undetectable poisons, even after her attempts to erase it. With each new discovery, Garrison's carefully constructed world crumbled a little more, revealing the extent of the betrayal and the calculating coldness of the woman he believed he loved. "I'll ask the question one last time," said Garrison, his voice dangerously calm as he turned on the recorder. "Why did you try to kill me? What do you want me to say?" Savannah exploded, all pretense of innocence abandoned in the face of evidence that she was completely cornered. "That I married you for your money. Yes, I did. That I planned every smile, every kiss, every night in your bed. Yes, I planned it. That when I discovered you had changed your will to leave almost everything to charity, I decided you needed to die. Yes, I decided." The words now poured out like poison, years of manipulation and pretense transforming into a torrent of bitter truths. Savannah no longer cared about the consequences. She had been caught, exposed, defeated. The recorder captured every word, every confession that sealed her fate, but she seemed beyond any rational consideration in that moment. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing all the bile, all the falsehood, all the rottenness she had carefully hidden beneath the mask of a devoted wife. Garrison listened in silence, his face an impenetrable mask, while the woman he believed he knew completely revealed herself before him. 20 years younger, Garrison. 20 years, she continued, gesticulating frantically despite the tubes and monitors connected to her body. "Did you really think I fell in love with you? With a man old enough to be my father? I deserved that fortune. So I deserve it for every minute I spent pretending to adore you, for every time I had to swallow your tedious stories about business, for every night I had to endure your wrinkled hands on my body." "And how did you plan to kill me?" asked Garrison, his voice strangely calm in the face of Savannah's emotional storm. "The sandwich was just the beginning, wasn't it?" The question acted like a cold shower, bringing Savannah back to the reality of her situation. The momentary fury was replaced by cold calculation. She had already confessed enough to be convicted, but perhaps there was still a way out. Remorse, temporary insanity, depression. There were angles that could be exploited to mitigate the severity of her punishment. She dried her tears with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, and slowly recomposed her expression. When she spoke again, her voice had recovered part of the seductive softness she had always used with Garrison, though now it sounded pathetic in its transparency. "Garrison, I wasn't in my right mind," she began, her voice trembling and low, calculatedly vulnerable. "When I saw the will, something broke inside me. I felt betrayed, abandoned. I didn't really plan. It was a crazy impulse, a moment of desperation. I'm deeply sorry, more than I can express. Please, You need to believe I'm not that horrible person. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. Stop, Garrison interrupted, raising his hand in a firm gesture. The diary was found, Savannah. I know exactly how you planned to poison me gradually over weeks, simulating a degenerative disease, until the final dose that would cause an apparently natural heart attack. I know how you researched methods to ensure the poison wouldn't be detected in a standard autopsy. I know how you calculated every detail, including the ideal date for my death, conveniently after our wedding anniversary, when suspicion about you would be lower. The color completely drained from Savannah's face. The diary. Her meticulous diary where she had recorded each step of the plan, each calculation, each prediction of what would happen after Garrison's death. A wave of nausea hit her forcefully, making her bring her hand to her mouth. There was no way out. No manipulation, no tears, no emotional appeal could save her from her own words written on those pages. For a terrible moment, she wished she had ingested more of the poison, had ended it right there on the living room floor, instead of facing what would come next. Garrison observed her reaction with the clinical attention of a scientist studying a particularly interesting species of insect. I always thought your beauty hid a certain coldness, he commented, almost as if speaking to himself. But I never imagined it hid a monster. And what happens now? Asked Savannah, her voice just a whisper, all pretense of control finally abandoned. Are you going to report me to the police? Drag me to jail? A heavy silence fell over the room as Garrison stared at the woman who had almost killed him. For a fleeting moment, Savannah glimpsed something in his eyes, a flash of pain, perhaps even pity, quickly replaced by the hardness that had become his default expression since the discovery. Garrison turned off the recorder and carefully tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. He stood up with deliberate movements, adjusting his impeccable suit as if preparing for an important business meeting. The police are already aware of everything, he explained calmly, as one might discuss the weather. There is an arrest warrant waiting for you as soon as you're discharged. The lawyer suggested I try an out-of-court settlement for the sake of my public image. They offered the possibility of psychiatric commitment instead of prison, provided you fully cooperated. And you refused, concluded Savannah, not a question but a resigned statement. You want to see me behind bars. Garrison walked to the door, stopping before opening it. When he turned to look one last time at the woman in the hospital bed, his face had lost some of its earlier hardness. There was now an almost contemplative expression, as if observing something simultaneously fascinating and repulsive. His eyes scanned Savannah's face, the woman who had shared his life for the past few years, now a complete stranger before him. I wanted to understand, he finally said, his voice betraying a deep fatigue. I wanted to comprehend how someone could pretend love for so long, how they could sleep by my side while planning my death. I thought if I heard your confession, if I saw the truth in your eyes, I would get some kind of closure. But there's nothing to understand, is there? You simply are this way. Garrison, please, begged Savannah, genuine tears now running down her face. Don't let me end like this. We had good moments, you can't deny that. There must be a part of you that still cares about me, that could forgive. The look Garrison gave her silenced her more effectively than any word. It was a look of absolute indifference, the kind of look one gives to an object, not a person. In that moment, Savannah knew with absolute certainty that she was completely alone, that there was nothing and no one who could save her from the fate she had created for herself. All her beauty, all her charm, all her manipulation skills were useless in the face of that look that saw her not as the seductive Savannah, but as any criminal who had tried to murder him for money. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks after your discharge, Garrison informed her, in the impersonal voice of a public official. My testimony and the physical evidence will be more than enough for a conviction. The doctors say you should be discharged tomorrow. The police will be here to escort you. It can't end like this, insisted Savannah, clinging to one last hope. Think of the scandal, your reputation. Everyone will know that your young wife tried to kill you. You'll be the laughingstock of social circles in the newspapers. A slight smile, the first since he had entered the room, appeared on Garrison's lips. It wasn't a warm or kind smile, but it had something satisfied about it, as if he had just confirmed a suspicion. He slightly raised his eyebrows, studying Savannah as if seeing her in a new light. an even more unfavorable light if that were possible. "Even now, you're still trying to manipulate," he observed, a note of reluctant admiration in his voice. "Remarkable, but useless. My reputation will survive. And as for being a laughingstock, well, I'd rather be the man who was almost poisoned by his gold-digging wife than the man who let her go unpunished for fear of what others might think." With those words, Garrison opened the door and left, closing it gently behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the silent room like a final sentence. Savannah stared at the closed door for long minutes, as if waiting for him to return, for everything to be revealed as an elaborate nightmare from which she would soon awaken. But the door remained closed, the monitors continued their rhythmic beeps, and the reality of her situation became increasingly inescapable. She had bet everything on a plan that seemed perfect and lost spectacularly. Now all that remained was to face the consequences. "This doesn't end here, Garrison," she whispered to the empty room, a final flash of her old arrogance shining through the despair. "No matter how long it takes, I'll find a way to get my revenge." The following morning arrived with a merciless clarity that seemed to mock Savannah. She had slept little, tormented by nightmares and the growing anxiety about what was to come. The medical team entered early, performing the final examinations necessary for her release. No one mentioned the police, but Savannah could feel the tension in the air, the furtive glances, the whispers interrupted when she approached. The news of the wife who had attempted to poison her millionaire husband had certainly already spread throughout the hospital, transforming her into an object of morbid curiosity. She put on the clothes a nurse had brought, not her own elegant clothes, but simple items provided by the hospital, another reminder of how her previous life had abruptly ended. "The doctor will come soon with your discharge documents," informed the nurse, avoiding eye contact while adjusting the last monitor. "There are some people waiting to speak with you after that." "People," Savannah repeated bitterly. You mean police officers, don't you? You can speak directly. I'm not a child who needs to be spared from the truth." At 10 in the morning, the doctor in charge entered the room, carrying a clipboard with the discharge documents. She was a middle-aged woman with a professional expression who treated Savannah with efficient courtesy, but without the warmth she would normally reserve for regular patients. While explaining the follow-up recommendations and medications, her eyes occasionally drifted to the door, as if expecting someone's arrival at any moment. Savannah mechanically signed the papers, her mind occupied not with medical instructions, but with images of prison cells, orange uniforms, supervised visits. The life that awaited her seemed so distant from the luxurious existence she had so carefully built that it almost seemed to belong to someone else. "Am I physically well enough to go straight to prison?" she suddenly asked, interrupting the medical explanations. "Or will I have to go through some kind of detention center first?" "I don't have information about those procedures," the doctor replied, clearly uncomfortable. "My role ends with your medical discharge. What happens afterward is outside my jurisdiction." When the doctor finally left, Savannah was alone again, sitting on the edge of the bed, her small luggage of hospital belongings beside her. It was 10:30 in the morning, and the silence of the room seemed deafening. Each minute of waiting was torture. Each second that passed brought her closer to the moment when her new reality would officially begin. She briefly considered the possibility of escape. She could simply leave the room, try to find an unguarded exit from the hospital. But where would she go? Without money, without documents, without support of any kind. The futility of the idea was so obvious that she almost laughed at herself for considering it. "From mansion to cell," she murmured to herself, observing her hands that now trembled slightly. "What a spectacular fall, Savannah." The firm knock on the door pulled her from her dark thoughts. Before she could respond, the door opened, revealing 2 uniformed police officers, an older man with a grave expression and a young woman whose eyes revealed poorly disguised curiosity. Behind them, to Savannah's surprise, was Garrison. He wore a different suit than the day before, equally impeccable, his face a mask of studied indifference. For a fleeting moment, Savannah felt a spark of hope. Perhaps his presence meant some kind of reconsideration, some chance of clemency. But when their gazes met, the coldness in his eyes extinguished any illusion. "Mrs. Savannah Harrington," the older officer began formally, We are here to arrest you on charges of attempted homicide. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." While the officer recited the rights, the female officer approached with handcuffs in her hands. The cold metal wrapped around Savannah's wrists with a definitive click that seemed to echo in the silent room. The sensation was surreal, as if she were watching a scene from a movie or television series, not living her own life. Her golden eyes, once so confident and seductive, now revealed a naked, primordial fear as they alternated between the police officers and the silent figure of Garrison standing at the door. "Did you come to witness my final humiliation?" she asked Garrison, her voice a mixture of bitterness and despair. "Are you satisfied with what you see?" "I came to close this chapter of my life," he responded simply, showing no emotion, "and to make sure that you would truly face justice." The officers led Savannah out of the room, through the hospital corridors, under the curious gazes of staff and patients. Each step was a humiliation, each look a stab to her pride. Garrison followed a few steps behind, not as a husband or even as a victim, but as a silent observer, a living witness to the fall she had brought upon herself. When they reached the hospital exit, Savannah saw something that made her blood freeze. A small gathering of reporters and photographers waiting, cameras already aimed at the door. The case had leaked to the press, as it inevitably would. The attempted murder, the betrayal, the poison, all elements of a perfect scandal were present. "I can't go through this," she muttered to the police officer at her side, her face losing what little color it had regained. "Please, there must be another way out. A service entrance, anything." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the officer replied without real sympathy. "This is the designated exit route." The flashes began even before Savannah had completely crossed the hospital doors. Reporters' shouts overlapped. Questions were thrown like darts. "Why did you try to kill your husband? Was the marriage a sham from the beginning? How did you obtain the poison?" Savannah lowered her head, trying to hide her face, but it was useless. Her previous world of glamour and privilege had transformed into a public nightmare of humiliation and judgment. The officers firmly made their way through the crowd of reporters, protecting her not out of compassion, but as standard procedure. The police car waited, rear door open like a black mouth ready to swallow her. Before entering the vehicle, Savannah cast one last look at Garrison, who observed the scene a few steps back, his face unreadable under the camera flashes. For a fleeting moment, their gazes met across the chaos. The man she had almost killed, the woman who had almost completely deceived him. There were no more words to be said, no manipulation to be attempted, no trick to be employed. There was only the raw and inescapable truth of what she had done, and what she would now face as a consequence. "Goodbye, Savannah," said Garrison, his words almost inaudible in the confusion, but perfectly clear to her. "May you find in your prison reflections the humanity that was lacking in your actions." The police car door closed with a definitive thud, isolating Savannah from the outside world. Through the window, she watched Garrison's figure grow smaller as the vehicle moved away, taking her to her new reality, a reality of iron bars, standardized uniforms, and lost freedom. The tears she finally allowed to fall were no longer of manipulation or self-pity, but of genuine understanding of the magnitude of her fall. The poison she had prepared for another had, in the end, destroyed her own life. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself as the car turned a corner, leaving the hospital and Garrison definitively behind. "How could I have been so stupid?" Spring had arrived in all its splendor, bringing with it new beginnings for both nature and Garrison and Ainsley. Months had passed since the fateful day of the poisoned sandwich, time enough for emotional wounds to begin healing and for the legal adoption procedures to be finalized. The process had not been simple. The bureaucracy, the investigations by social workers, the court hearings, but Garrison had used all his influence and resources to expedite the proceedings. Today, finally, was the day when Ainsley would officially become his daughter before the law. The mansion, once the scene of betrayal and near tragedy, was gradually transforming into a true home. The room that Garrison had prepared for the girl was spacious and welcoming, with walls in soft shades of green, Ainsley's favorite color, and a bookshelf filled with books that she devoured with growing eagerness, compensating for years of formal education lost on the streets. The malnourished little beggar girl that Garrison had found fainting in front of his office was now gaining weight and height, her eyes once dull from hunger, now bright with intelligence and curiosity. "Are you nervous about today's hearing?" asked Garrison while adjusting his tie in the mirror, observing the reflection of Ainsley, who waited for him at the bedroom door, wearing a simple but elegant dress, her once tangled hair now perfectly styled in an elaborate braid. "A little," she admitted with the straightforward honesty that Garrison so admired. "What if the judge thinks a single man can't raise a girl? What if he asks about her?" Garrison abandoned the mirror and approached Ainsley, kneeling down to be at eye level with her, a gesture that had become habitual between them, a silent demonstration of respect. The businessman's hands, once accustomed only to signing contracts and shaking hands with other executives, now frequently occupied themselves preparing school lunches, helping with homework, or simply drying occasional tears. The transformation in his life was as profound as it was unexpected. The man who months ago dedicated himself exclusively to expanding his business now found his greatest purpose in the smile of a child who, ironically, owed her own life to the woman who had almost killed him. The irony of this connection was not lost on Garrison, who saw in it not a coincidence, but a greater purpose that he still didn't completely understand. "The judge will see what I see, an extraordinary girl who deserves a home and a father who loves her," he replied, his voice gentle but firm as he adjusted a strand of hair that had escaped from the braid. "As for Savannah, she is no longer part of our lives. The judge will understand that." "Do you still think about her sometimes?" asked Ainsley, her eyes showing understanding beyond her years. "I can tell when you look at certain places in the house, as if you're seeing ghosts." The court hearing proceeded with an almost anticlimactic formality, considering the importance of the moment. The judge, already familiar with the case through social workers' reports and aware of Garrison's reputation as an upstanding businessman and philanthropist, asked only a few standard questions. Ainsley, with her natural intelligence and precocious maturity acquired on the streets, impressed the magistrate with articulate and sincere answers about her desire to have Garrison as her father. When the gavel came down, finalizing the adoption, few eyes remained dry in the small courtroom. The transformation was officially complete. The nameless beggar without hope had become Ainsley Harrington, heir to a business empire, but more importantly, Garrison's beloved daughter. As they left the courthouse, hands joined and broad smiles illuminating their faces, they were met not by reporters hungry for scandals, as had happened months before when leaving the hospital, but by a small group of employees from Garrison's company and some teachers from Ainsley's new school, all bringing flowers and small gifts to celebrate the new family. "How do you feel now that you're officially my daughter?" asked Garrison as they drove back home, observing from the corner of his eye the thoughtful face of the girl who was now watching the city through the car window. "I think I always knew I would be your daughter since that day with the sandwich," she replied after a moment of reflection. "The papers just made official what we already felt, didn't they?" The following weeks brought a comfortable routine for father and daughter. Garrison had completely reorganized his professional life to be more present. He had delegated responsibilities, reduced travel, implemented flexible schedules that allowed him to take and pick up Ainsley from school whenever possible. The girl, in turn, dedicated herself to her studies with a veracity that impressed teachers and classmates. Years of survival on the streets had sharpened her natural intelligence, making her extraordinarily adaptable and perceptive. What she lacked in formal knowledge, she compensated with determination and an unusual ability to connect ideas. During a particularly pleasant dinner, while Garrison was talking about his company's charitable projects, Ainsley interrupted him with an idea that would change the course of their lives again. She was tired of seeing her former street companions still struggling for basic daily survival, while she now lived in luxury and safety. She proposed not just donations or traditional assistance programs, but something more direct, more personal. A restaurant that would serve free meals to homeless people, a place where they could eat with dignity, without humiliating lines or bureaucracy. "I don't want to just give food," explained Ainsley with growing passion, gesturing with her fork as her ideas flowed. "I want to create a place where they can feel like people, not problems. A place with real tables, comfortable chairs, hot food served on ceramic plates, not in disposable containers." Most business people would say that's financially unfeasible, Garrison replied, not as criticism, but as a practical observation. But I guess we're not most people, are we? The project advanced with impressive speed, driven by Ainsley's enthusiasm and Garrison's resources. They found a spacious commercial space downtown, strategically located in an area frequented by homeless people. The renovation was extensive, not to create an ostentatiously luxurious environment, but a welcoming, colorful, and dignified space. Solid wooden tables, comfortable chairs, warm lighting, walls decorated with murals painted by local artists depicting scenes of hope and community. The kitchen was equipped with the best, not out of extravagance but out of respect for the staff and diners. Garrison insisted that every detail of the space send the same message. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves quality. Ainsley actively participated in every step of the project, from choosing the wall colors to designing the menu. Her experiences on the streets provided insights that no professional consultant could offer. She knew exactly what made a vulnerable person feel respected or humiliated. Evenings were often filled with long conversations between father and daughter about every aspect of the project, with Garrison marveling at the girl's maturity and wisdom. "Have you thought about the restaurant's name?" Garrison asked one night, as they reviewed together the designs for the sign that would be installed on the facade. "Something that captures the essence of what we want to create." "I was thinking of shared table," Ainsley replied, drawing the words with her finger on the paper. "Because it's not about charity or handouts. It's about sharing what we have with those who need it, as equals." The inauguration day arrived on a sunny Sunday morning. Garrison and Ainsley arrived early, overseeing the final preparations with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The hired staff, which deliberately included people who had lived on the streets and were now receiving professional training, moved efficiently through the kitchen, preparing the first service. The menu was simple but nutritious, created by a renowned chef who had volunteered for the project. Substantial soups, rice, beans, well-prepared meats, fresh salads, and, at Ainsley's special insistence, homemade desserts. "Because sweets make any day feel like a celebration," she had explained. The doors would officially open at noon, but by 10 in the morning a small crowd was forming outside. Homeless people who had heard about the new restaurant through the efficient street grapevine. Ainsley, wearing the uniform she herself had designed, a green t-shirt with the restaurant logo and a white apron, watched through the window with growing emotion, recognizing some faces from her days on the streets. "I'm afraid they won't come," she confessed, surprising Garrison, who was adjusting fresh flowers on the tables. "What if they think it's a trap? On the streets, we learn to distrust things that seem too good to be true." "They will come," Garrison responded with confidence, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Maybe not all today, but they will come, and each person who leaves here satisfied and respected will tell 10 others." At noon sharp, Garrison and Ainsley positioned themselves side by side to officially open the doors of shared table. The first to enter was an elderly man with a white beard, worn clothes and tired eyes that widened at the sight of the welcoming environment. Ainsley approached him personally, recognizing him as Quentin, a man who had once shared his piece of bread with her on a particularly difficult day on the streets. With gentleness, she led him to a table by the window, explaining how the restaurant worked: no lines, no registration, no time limit, just respect, good food, and dignity. The others entered hesitantly, distrustful glances gradually transforming into surprise, and then into something close to joy as they realized this wasn't just another rushed soup kitchen, but a real restaurant where they were treated as valued customers. Garrison watched with growing emotion as his daughter navigated naturally between the tables, conversing, serving, touching a shoulder here, smiling welcomingly there, completely in her element. "I never imagined I could feel this good," a young man commented to Ainsley, as she served him a second portion of rice. "It's strange, you know, sitting at a real table with real cutlery. Makes one feel human." "That's exactly why we created this place," she answered, her smile illuminating the face once marked by malnutrition. "Because you are human, always have been, regardless of where you sleep or what you own." The hours passed, and the restaurant remained full, with people coming and going in a constant but tranquil flow. Garrison alternated between helping in the kitchen and serving tables, completely setting aside the figure of the powerful businessman to be just another server. To his surprise, he discovered that he enjoyed the manual work, cutting vegetables, cleaning tables, serving dishes. There was something deeply satisfying in the simplicity of these tasks, so different from the abstract complexities of the corporate world. He observed with admiration how Ainsley genuinely connected with each person, remembering names, asking about specific problems, offering not just food, but that rare and precious good for those who live on the streets: recognition. During a momentary pause in the flow of people, father and daughter found themselves in the kitchen, both with stained aprons and expressions of satisfied exhaustion. Garrison realized, with a sudden clarity that moved him, that he had never felt so fulfilled in his entire life as in that moment, serving meals to people who didn't even know who he was, side by side with the girl who had saved his life, and who was now saving his in ways he could never have imagined. "I saw you talking a lot with that grey-haired lady," Garrison commented as they replenished trays with fresh bread. "Seemed like a serious conversation." "Mrs. Winifred?" Ainsley confirmed, her eyes momentarily shadowed. "She was friends with my mother. I hadn't seen her since and since before. She cried when she learned that now I have a father and a home." The following months established a routine that brought deep satisfaction to both Garrison and Ainsley. During the week he managed his business, and she attended school where she quickly stood out as an exemplary student. On weekends, they dedicated themselves entirely to shared table, which had expanded to include not only meals, but also basic services such as showers, clean clothes, volunteer medical assistance, and even vocational courses. Garrison used his business contacts to create employment programs, while Ainsley, with her unique understanding of the real needs of homeless people, ensured that each initiative maintained its focus on dignity and respect. The transformation in both their lives was evident to anyone who knew them before and after the fateful day of the sandwich. Garrison, previously a lonely workaholic whose only purpose was to accumulate more professional success, now found genuine meaning in small gestures of generosity and in the joy of seeing his daughter flourish. Ainsley, in turn, combined the best of both worlds, the security and opportunities of her new life with the empathy and compassion forged during her years on the streets. "You know what I like most about you, Dad?" Ainsley asked one afternoon, as they cleaned tables together after a particularly busy day at the restaurant. "It's that you never try to fix people. You just accept that they need food and respect, not sermons or pity." "I think I learned that from you," Garrison replied, stopping what he was doing to truly look at his daughter. "You taught me that helping someone doesn't make me superior, it just makes me human." On an especially significant afternoon, almost a year after the sandwich incident, Garrison and Ainsley worked side by side in the restaurant kitchen, preparing a special soup using a recipe that Ainsley's biological mother used to make. The girl cried, remembering small details: the specific smell of the herbs, the way her mother cut the potatoes into perfectly equal cubes, the song she hummed while stirring the broth. Garrison listened attentively, aware of the privilege of sharing these precious memories. For him, these conversations were never painful or threatening. On the contrary, he deeply valued that Ainsley kept her biological mother's memory alive, understanding that his role was not to replace her, but to offer a different and complementary love. As they worked, Ainsley told Garrison about her dream of expanding the project to other areas of the city, perhaps even to other cities. Her face lit up when talking about future possibilities, demonstrating a capacity for planning and vision that increasingly impressed her adoptive father. Garrison realized, with a mixture of pride and admiration, that the little beggar who once saved his life would probably save many others in the future. "Do you think I'm being too ambitious?" asked Ainsley, momentarily insecure in the face of her father's thoughtful expression. "Maybe we should better consolidate this restaurant before thinking about opening others." "Never underestimate what you can accomplish, my daughter," replied Garrison, his eyes shining with genuine pride. "If a year ago someone had told me that a 12-year-old girl would completely change my life and the lives of hundreds of other people, I would have laughed. And yet, here we are." The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light through the restaurant windows, when Garrison and Ainsley finally sat down for their own meal. The space was temporarily empty in the interval between lunch and dinner. They ate the soup they had prepared together, savoring not just the food, but also the moment of shared tranquility. Occasionally they exchanged smiles or comments about the day, comfortable in the silence that only exists between people who genuinely understand each other. Garrison observed his daughter with a gratitude that transcended words. The poison that should have taken his life had become, through a series of extraordinary events, the catalyst for a more meaningful life than he had ever imagined possible. Ainsley had taught him that true wealth was not in bank accounts or successful ventures, but in the ability to transform pain into purpose, tragedy into opportunity, need into generosity. As he savored the soup, made with simple ingredients but full of meaning, Garrison reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them here. A lonely businessman and a hungry beggar, now father and daughter, united not by blood, but by something equally powerful: the conscious choice to create a family and a shared purpose. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't fainted in front of your office that day," commented Ainsley, as if she could read her father's thoughts. "It's strange to think that something as terrible as almost dying of hunger could lead to something so wonderful." "Life is made of these paradoxes, daughter," replied Garrison, reaching out to hold her hand across the table. "What seems to be our greatest tragedy often contains the seed of our greatest blessing. We just need to have eyes to see and courage to transform it." The cold, impersonal light of the state women's prison penetrated through the barred windows, illuminating the cafeteria with a sterile quality that accentuated the misery of the environment. It was lunchtime, and Savannah, wearing the standard orange uniform that she hated with all her soul, pushed the food distribution cart with mechanical movements. Her black hair, once silky and impeccably treated, was now tied in a simple, lifeless bun, beginning to show dark roots where professional coloring once existed. Her hands, which once displayed perfectly manicured nails, were now dry and rough from constant work with harsh cleaning products. It had been a few months in that hell since her conviction for attempted murder, and each day seemed worse than the previous one. The fall from her position as a rich and sophisticated wife to an inmate working in the penitentiary cafeteria was so brutal that sometimes Savannah woke up believing it was all just a particularly cruel nightmare, only to soon be confronted with the harsh reality of her 9-square-foot cell, the lack of privacy, and the constant contempt from other inmates. "Serve properly, princess," growled the corpulent woman in front of her, pushing the plate back to Savannah. "I want more of that mashed potato, and don't come at me with that miserable portion." "It's the standard amount for everyone," replied Savannah tensely, her golden eyes fixed on the plate to avoid eye contact. "If I serve more to you, there won't be enough for the others." The tray hit the counter violently, and before Savannah could react, she felt the hot mashed potato hit her face, slowly dripping down her cheeks and neck, some portions falling onto her uniform. The laughter around her was like stabs in her ears. Savannah closed her eyes, mentally counting to 10, a technique she had learned to control the anger and humiliation that constantly threatened to consume her. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Since the first day in the penitentiary, when the news of her conviction for trying to poison her millionaire husband was spread by the newspapers, Savannah had become a preferred target. The other inmates, many serving sentences for crimes of necessity or desperation, despised the poison princess, as they had nicknamed her, a woman who had everything and yet chose to commit such a cold and calculating crime. The guard responsible for the cafeteria approached unhurriedly, more out of obligation than genuine concern. "Clean this up and continue serving, Harrington," she ordered dryly. "And you, Bryn, to the back of the line. We know who started this." "Someday you'll pay for every humiliation they make me endure here," Savannah whispered to herself as she grabbed a cloth to clean her face. "I won't be in this place forever." The hours of work in the cafeteria stretched like an eternity for Savannah. After serving lunch to approximately 200 inmates, many of whom made a point of insulting or deliberately provoking her, she still needed to clean all the tables, the floor, the utensils, and prepare the place for the next meal. The work was physically exhausting, especially for someone who had never done any kind of household labor in her entire life. Her back constantly ached, her feet developed calluses, and her hands frequently bled from small cuts caused by the knives she washed or the corrosive chemicals. The worst, however, was the impact on her dignity. Savannah, who had always prided herself on her impeccable appearance and posture, was now forced to clean up vomit, collect food scraps, scrub stubborn grease stains. Each movement was a forced lesson in humility, each completed task a reminder of how low she had fallen. When it was finally her own time to eat lunch, the cafeteria was almost empty, with only a few inmates deliberately remaining to watch the princess eat the leftovers. "You know, I was thinking," commented a middle-aged inmate named Tamsin, approaching as Savannah sat alone with her tray. "It must not be comfortable for you to eat here, knowing that any one of us could put a little something extra in your food." "What do you mean by that?" asked Savannah, her voice tense as she looked suspiciously at the stew on her plate. "Are you threatening me?" A slow, cruel smile spread across Tamsin's face as she leaned in closer, her eyes fixed on Savannah's plate. With a deliberately slow movement, she took the salt shaker from the table and poured a generous amount over the ex-socialite's food. The message was clear. It could be salt, but it could be anything else. Savannah pushed the plate away, her stomach twisting with hunger and fear. This was a new type of torture that the inmates had discovered, playing with her fear of poisoning. The irony escaped no one, least of all Savannah. The woman who had tried to kill her husband with a poisoned sandwich now lived in constant dread that someone would do the same to her. Each meal became a game of Russian roulette, each forkful an act of courage or stupidity, depending on one's point of view. Savannah often went hungry for days, eating only pre-packaged food she could buy from the commissary with the little money she earned from her work. "No need to be so nervous, princess," laughed Tamsin, walking away with evident satisfaction. "Today it's just salt. Maybe tomorrow I'll be more creative. How can I survive 5 years in this place?" Savannah thought desperately, looking at the ruined plate in front of her. "They'll end up killing me before that." The prison hierarchy system was particularly cruel to someone like Savannah. In the rigid social structure of the penitentiary, she occupied the lowest rung, not for being physically weak or non-intimidating, but for representing everything that many of those women despised. While most inmates came from backgrounds of poverty, abuse, or limited opportunities, Savannah had had everything: beauty, education, comfort, a rich husband, and yet she had chosen crime. This was unforgivable in the eyes of the others. Added to that, the fact that her crime had been so calculating and directed at someone who, according to the newspapers, treated her well, made her especially despicable. The poisonous one, poison princess, luxury viper, the nicknames multiplied, each more degrading than the other. Savannah had initially tried to maintain the haughty posture that characterized her in the outside world, but she quickly learned that such behavior only intensified the persecution. Now she kept her eyes down, spoke as little as possible, and accepted the humiliations in calculated silence, storing each offense as fuel for the hatred growing inside her. "They say next week's food will be better," commented a guard, observing Savannah push the untouched plate aside. "Not eating anything today?" "I'd rather starve than eat something they might have tampered with," replied Savannah, her voice barely a whisper. "I never know when they're joking or when they've really put something in the food." After a miserable 20-minute break for her own meal, time during which she couldn't eat absolutely anything, Savannah returned to work. The afternoon would be dedicated to thoroughly cleaning the cafeteria, preparing it for dinner. On her knees on the cold floor, she vigorously scrubbed a persistent stain while trying to ignore the pain in her joints. The strong smell of disinfectant mixed with the residual odor of food, creating a nauseating combination that had already become part of her daily existence. Through the high-barred windows, she could see a patch of blue sky, a cruel reminder of the outside world now denied to her. On days like this, memories of her previous life invaded her mind like cruel ghosts. Lazy mornings in the king-size bed of the mansion, bubble baths in her marble tub, massage sessions and spa days, shopping at exclusive boutiques. All of this seemed to belong to someone else, to a life that had existed in another universe. Reality now was this dirty floor, this orange uniform, these rough and injured hands. "Daydreaming, Harrington?" The guard's sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "That floor won't clean itself, and afterward I need you in the pantry to organize the supplies that arrived." "I'm almost finishing this section," she responded mechanically, scrubbing even harder. "How is Garrison living now while I'm in this hell?" "He's probably already found another woman to replace me, someone who is enjoying the fortune that should be mine." Work in the pantry was, ironically, the only moment of the day when Savannah felt some relief. Away from the constant stares and taunts of the other inmates, she could breathe a little more freely among the metal shelves full of food supplies. There, in relative isolation, she sometimes allowed herself to cry silently, tears flowing without restriction, while she organized cans, bags of rice and beans, boxes of powdered milk. Bending down to pick up a bag of flour that had fallen, Savannah found something unusual, a small magazine thrown in a corner, probably left there by some other inmate responsible for the pantry. It was a celebrity magazine, already a few months out of date, but still a precious connection to the outside world. Quickly looking over her shoulder to make sure she was alone, Savannah grabbed the magazine and hid it under her uniform. She would read it later in her cell when darkness offered some privacy. Any fragment of the world beyond the prison walls was a treasure, even if it was just to feed her fantasies of revenge and return to society. "What have you been doing back there for so long?" questioned the guard, suddenly appearing at the entrance to the pantry. "It's not break time, Harrington." "I was trying to organize the flour bags that are collapsing," Savannah replied quickly, feeling the paper of the magazine uncomfortably rub against her skin under the uniform. Someone piled everything up carelessly. When she finally returned to her cell that night, after dinner, which she again couldn't eat for fear of poisoning, Savannah felt every muscle in her body protest with pain. The physical exhaustion was total, but her mind remained restless, refusing to give her the relief of sleep. In the dark, lying on the thin, uncomfortable mattress, she carefully removed the hidden magazine and, using the weak light penetrating through the bars of the high window, began to flip through the pages. It was in the social events section that her heart stopped for a moment. There was Garrison, in a color photo from a charity gala. He smiled widely, looking younger and happier than ever, and beside him was a girl of approximately 12 years old, also smiling, elegantly dressed. The caption read, "Businessman Garrison Harrington and his adopted daughter Ainsley at the inauguration of the Shared Table Foundation, dedicated to helping homeless people." Savannah felt the blood freeze in her veins. Garrison had adopted a child, founded a charity, all this while she rotted in prison. Anger rose in her throat like bile, almost choking her. "He looked so happy," she whispered to the shadows, her fingers gripping the page with such force that she almost tore it. "While I lost everything, he gained a daughter and a new cause for his philanthropist image." "Harrington, silence over there," came the harsh voice of a guard making the night rounds. "Save your monologues for visiting hours. Oh wait, you never have visitors, do you?" The sound of cruel laughter from neighboring cells followed the guard's comment. One more humiliation, to add to the endless catalogue of indignities that constituted her days in prison. It was true. In 8 months, Savannah hadn't received a single visit. She had no close family, and her supposed friends from her social circles had completely disappeared after her arrest, as if they feared disgrace was contagious. The only visitors were occasionally her lawyer, an overworked public defender who barely remembered the details of her case, and, just once, a reporter who had obtained authorization for an interview, only to later publish a sensationalist article about the fall of the poisonous lady. Savannah had learned the hard way that she was completely alone in her misery. Even her former admirers, men who had begged for her attention at parties and events, now treated her like a social leper. It was as if she had ceased to exist as a person the moment the prison doors closed behind her. She carefully folded the page with the photo of Garrison and his new daughter, hiding it under her thin pillow. That image would feed her thoughts in the coming days, weeks, months, a constant reminder of everything she had lost and all the reasons she had to hate. "Enjoy your freedom while you can, Garrison," she muttered into the darkness, curling up under the rough blanket. "When I get out of here, I'll find a way to destroy your happiness, just as you destroyed mine." "Shut up already, Harrington," shouted an inmate from a nearby cell, "or tomorrow you'll find more than salt in your lunch." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Savannah's routine rarely varied, waking up to the strident alarm at 5 in the morning, taking a quick cold shower in a bathroom without privacy, putting on the detestable uniform, working in the cafeteria, enduring constant humiliations, trying to find something safe to eat, returning to her cell, and everything started again the next day. The boredom was almost as unbearable as the humiliations. For someone who previously lived among parties, trips, shopping and spas, the monotony of prison was a particularly cruel form of torture. The only events that broke the routine were calls to the lawyer or mandatory sessions with the prison psychologist, a perceptive woman who seemed to see through the lies and manipulations that Savannah tried to employ, just as the little beggar had seen through the poisoned sandwich. In one of her most recent sessions, the psychologist had pointed out the terrible irony of her current situation, how her greatest fears now exactly mirrored the crime she had committed. It's almost as if the universe is giving you a lesson about empathy in the most direct way possible, the professional had said. Savannah hated these sessions almost as much as she hated working in the cafeteria. "Today the fish looks especially suspicious," commented Tamsin as she passed by Savannah in the dinner line, a malicious smile playing on her lips. "Who knows what could be hidden in that creamy sauce, Princess? Maybe you should try it first before serving it to others." "I won't fall for that provocation again," Savannah responded, keeping her expression neutral while serving the standard portion. "Do what you want, but I won't give you the pleasure of seeing me react." It was an especially difficult night in the cafeteria. A new inmate had arrived that week, and the older ones felt the need to demonstrate the social hierarchy of the prison. They chose Savannah as the perfect example, obviously. It began with verbal provocations, evolved into food deliberately thrown on the floor she had just cleaned, and culminated with an entire tray turned over her head, macaroni with tomato sauce dripping down her face and hair, while strident laughter echoed through the environment.
The guards, as always, intervened only when the situation had out of control, more concerned with maintaining general order than protecting a single especially unpopular inmate.
Savannah remained motionless throughout the incident, eyes fixed on the floor, letting the sauce flow freely down her face without trying to clean it. Years ago, such public humiliation would have completely destroyed her. Now it was just another day in the state penitentiary, just another indignity to be endured. "Looks like the princess took a sauce bath today," commented a guard, observing Savannah cleaning herself with paper towels in the bathroom. Who was it this time? Tamsin or Bryn? "What difference does it make?" Savannah responded bitterly, scrubbing her sticky hair. "No one is ever really punished for attacking me. I'm practically the official punching bag of the prison." Hours later, when all the dishes had been washed, the tables cleaned, the floor scrubbed, and the preparations for the next day's breakfast completed, Savannah remained in the empty cafeteria. On her face, there were still stubborn traces of tomato sauce she had been unable to completely remove, and her hair, even after a quick and inadequate wash in the bathroom sink, remained stiff in some spots. Kneeling on the floor with a mop and a bucket of bleach, she obsessively cleaned a stain that the guard had insisted was still visible, although Savannah suspected it was just another way to prolong her humiliation. The silence of the empty cafeteria contrasted dramatically with the noisy chaos of a few hours earlier. On those rare occasions when she was completely alone like this, Savannah allowed herself to reflect on the choices that had led her to this situation. If she had been more patient, if she had manipulated Garrison differently to alter the will, if she had chosen a less detectable method of murder, the alternative possibilities tormented her like mocking ghosts. "I could be on a beach right now drinking champagne as a rich widow," she muttered to herself, scrubbing hard at the non-existent stain. "Instead, I'm on my knees cleaning a prison floor, fearing being poisoned at every meal." "Talking to yourself again, Harrington?" The night guard's voice came from the door, making Savannah start. "Finish that up quickly. Lockdown in 15 minutes. The cold light of the cafeteria cast shadows as Savannah finished wringing out the mop. Her red, cracked hands, damaged by chemicals, shocked her. They weren't the elegant hands that once charmed Garrison, but a prisoner's hands that told the story of her fall. As she put away the materials, she contemplated the endless cycle that awaited her. Taunts, threats, and the constant fear of poisoning. 5 years ahead. The thought was almost unbearable. 5 years of hell for a plan that didn't even work, she whispered to the empty cafeteria. The universe has a truly perverse sense of humor. "Come on, Harrington," the guard called again. "To your cell now." Savannah took one last look at the impeccably clean cafeteria, satisfied at least with this small triumph against chaos. In the confines of her current existence, she had learned to value microscopic victories. Tomorrow the cycle would begin again. She would once more be the poison princess, the target of mockery and threats. But for this brief moment, she allowed herself a second of peace to remember who she had been and imagine who she might be again when she left this place. Hatred was now her fuel. Hatred for Garrison, for Ainsley, for justice, for the inmates, for the world that had forgotten her. It was the only thing preventing her from breaking completely. One day I'll get out of here, she thought, walking toward the exit. And when that day comes, everyone will pay for every second in this hell. Hurry up, said the guard, a casual comment that carried the weight of a sentence. The promise that this nightmare would continue, day after day, until her debt to society was considered paid. If Ainsley and Garrison's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon.